Enough. The GBV Conversation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon and mulweni, and welcome back to Enough, the GBV Conversation. This series is kindly brought to you by the Islamic Medical Association of South Africa in collaboration with the Saartjie Baartman Center and supported by Radio 786. The GBV Conversation team supports the effort to show commitment to the cause of activism against gender-based violence by educating, uplifting survivors, families, and communities. Combating gender-based violence and understanding its complexity often serves as barriers to effective prevention and response. Last week, we understood that women are largely the victims of abuse. Today's episode will aim to understand the cycle of violence and why women stay in abusive relationships. We start off today's episode with a poem titled Today I Got Flowers by 𝙁𝙗𝙩𝙚𝙀.
I got flowers today. It wasn't my birthday or any other special day. We had our first argument last night, and he said a lot of cruel things that really hurt me. I know he is sorry and didn't mean the things he said, because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today. It wasn't our anniversary or any other special day. Last night he threw me into a wall and started to choke me. It seemed like a nightmare. I couldn't believe it was real. I woke up this morning sore and bruised all over. I know he must be sorry, because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today, and it wasn't Mother's Day or any other special day. Last night he beat me up again, and it was much worse than all the other times. If I leave him, what will I do? How will I take care of my kids? What about money? I'm afraid of him and scared to leave, but I know he must be sorry because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today. Today was a very special day. It was the day of my funeral. Last night he finally killed me. He beat me to death. If only I'd gathered enough courage and strength to leave him, I would not have gotten flowers today.
I Got Flowers Today by 𝙁𝙗𝙩𝙀𝙀, starting off our conversation in today's episode of Enough, the GBV Conversation. I'd like to welcome back to studio senior clinical psychologist at the Department of Health at Lentegeur Psychiatric Hospital, Fatima Ismail, who has worked at the Saartjie Baartman Center and has 10 to 15 years of experience in the field of counseling and training on domestic violence. Assalamu alaikum, Fatima.
Wa alaikum salam, and good afternoon, evening to all our listeners.
And how are you doing this evening?
Good, thank you.
Alhamdulillah. And another warm welcome and a warm return to our guests this evening, who is Caroline Peters, Director of the Callas Foundation, a feminist, GBV activist and GBV survivor. Good afternoon, Caroline.
Good afternoon, Qaadirah, and to all the listeners.
And how are you doing this evening?
I'm good. I'm the third function for the day, because 16 days is hectic, yeah. But I'm good, yes.
It's wonderful to have you with me in studio, and I'm certainly looking forward to our conversation this evening. Now, Fatima, this evening we're sort of focusing, on the cycles of abuse and why women choose to stay. Could you please explain to us the different stages that women go through in abusive relationships?
Yeah. Qaadirah, I want to start off by saying that just listening to that poem by 𝙁𝙗𝙩𝙀𝙀, each time I actually listen to it over and over, it still sends goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
And it just shows the impact and the effect that it has on one. It's so profound. I want to also emphasize that in the poem, she says that if only I had courage and strength to leave. I also want to emphasize the strength and courage it takes to actually stay in an abusive relationship, and the resilience that it takes. So the poem very nicely describes the different stages that a woman would go through in an abusive relationship, and what we define as actually the cycle of violence. Now, the cycle of violence has been developed to actually understand the complexity around the abuse, all right, and how it coexists with love in the same way. Okay, I got flowers today. So there's episodes of good and bad through the relationship. So the cycle of violence we often refer to as 3 or 4 stages that we define. The first one that I'd like to discuss is the tension build-up phase. And with the tension build-up phase, we often describe it as a woman walking on eggshells, feeling anxious. Something is going to happen. And women, do not underestimate that sixth sense that you have, that something is going to happen. We often find that women end up keeping the children out of the way, cooking the favorite food, trying to really contain the abuser, feeling quite anxious and distressed that anytime something may actually just blow up. So anything can lead actually to smaller arguments, verbal abuse, swearing, calling the person stupid, calling out on your mistakes that you have made. And anything with the children also being involved can actually push the person to the next stage. Now, anything can lead to what we call the violent, abusive or acute stage. Okay. It can even be less salt in the food. So violent stage is where there's more extreme violence, and this can take the form of sexual or physical violence. It can be destruction to property. It can be breaking things around the house, holding the children hostage, holding you hostage in isolation. And then we have a honeymoon phase. A honeymoon phase can be often 2 days, 2 weeks, sometimes 2 years, or not at all. All right. A honeymoon phase is the more calmer stage, all right, where the perpetrator apologizes, as you've heard in the poem, apologizes, resorts to buying you flowers, taking you on a vacation, spoiling you and the children, apologizing and saying, I'm sorry, I will go for help, all right? And the cycle may continue. The next time you may find a woman actually applying for a protection order or leaving the abuse, going to their parents' house, to their mom, leaving to a shelter. And the cycle can still continue where the person may apologize again. You hope that they are going to change, give them another chance, and that cycle just perpetuates in that way.
Now, Caroline, apparently not all women, experience this honeymoon phase. They oscillate between the tension phase and the abusive phase. What's your take on this?
Qaadirah, I just want to latch on to what Fatima just said about that poem. Exactly that. It makes me feel sad. I mean, I posted, I keep on posting that poem. I post over and over. And look, as activists, our awareness is not just through 16 days. And it's a poem that stands out for me. However, I want to also again say to women, because remember we have women listening out there, the poem ends off by saying, I wish I had the courage and strength to leave. And again, she blames herself. And so often women blame themselves for staying, and for various reasons women stay. And then one of the other things that Fatima said was about the cycle. So the cycle continues, and it can happen. Today's beaten you. This evening, he wants to be intimate with you, and he's so sorry. It can happen the next day. It can take a week, 2 months, and so the cycle continues. However, we find that for some women, after a period of time, he doesn't take you even to the honeymoon stage, what we call the honeymoon stage. The cycle of violence will go between tension and violent, or the actual event, the acute stage, like she said. So for many women, eventually they live like that. And that's why when we find women are so traumatized because there's not even a honeymoon stage anymore. The cycle goes between the tension and the honeymoon stage. Not honey, and the violent stage where the actual event take place. So, yeah.
Now, often when we speak of gender-based violence and, these sort of instances are highlighted, as Caroline pointed out, women, they live in that constant state of fear. The question is then posed, but why don't you just leave? So, Fatima, why doesn't she just leave?
It's a very, very big question, all right? And I think that it's easy for someone from the outside to think that the logical thing to do is to leave, right? It's not that easy. It's absolutely not that easy to leave an abusive relationship. And besides the complexity, I think that also society normalizes unhealthy behavior. So people may not understand that their relationship is actually abusive or dysfunctional. All right? That's one aspect. So firstly, they may not recognize that they're actually in an abusive relationship. And then, as Caroline mentioned, that cycle that can continue between the tension build-up phase and the violent stage can lead, imagine the trauma that one can go through with that. So as a psychologist, we also want to think about the generalized anxiety disorder, the depression that comes up, the post-traumatic stress disorder that comes up, that the person may not necessarily have the energy to leave, all right? There's different reasons. There's emotional reasons, there's societal reasons, there's economic reasons, all right? And so women may not leave because of fear that they would be killed, all right? And actually, research shows that a woman may actually stay in a relationship or actually leave in and out of an abusive relationship for at least 7 to 12 times.
Okay.
So think about it. Let me just repeat that. 7 to 12 times before actually leaving for good, all right? So, and we want to ask why. Why does it take so long? Women are such resilient beings that they will persevere and really put their children at the forefront. So they do not leave because of the sake of children. They want their children to have a father, all right? And what do children want? Children want their mom and dad to be together. So a woman may sacrifice her own unhappiness for the sake of their children, all right? And that children may grow up either being abusers themselves or being perpetrators or victims themselves, and may turn back on the mom for not leaving sooner because finally they may themselves be at the hands of the abuser. And then we also find that women may not necessarily be skilled because they have been restricted to work or been isolated. They're not skilled. So they don't know how are they going to cope on their own financially. All right, how are they going to cope emotionally? How are they going to, it's rather, I am aware and familiar with the cycle of violence and I can predict, he's in a bad mood today. Then if I were to leave, what is that unknown looking like? And am I prepared to rather put myself in an uncomfortable position with not knowing what to expect than rather being in an abusive relationship where I know already what to expect. So that's one of the aspects as well. And then women really feel the pressure of being judged, okay, and especially by other women. Let's face it, all right. These are some of the reasons women may not leave because they have oftentimes gone as their first port of call to religious leaders and others and family who may have asked him to stay for better or for worse. You've made this intention, so you need to stay in it. We need to ride or die in it. You've made your bed, so now you need to sleep in it. There's many reasons. I can go on and on and on.
I'd like for you to go on and on, but we are due for a short break, so we'll very quickly take our break. Please stay tuned to Radio 786 on 100.4 FM.
Enough. The GBV Conversation.
Welcome back to Enough, the GBV Conversation. Myself, Qaadirah, Mohammed, in for Mushfiqa Botha this evening. And in studio with me is Fatima Ismail as well as Caroline Peters. This evening we are reflecting on the cycles of abuse and why women stay. And just before we went for the break, Fatima took us through, and trying to give us some sort of understanding and some sort of insight as to why women don't just walk out of abusive relationships. So it's not as simple as it is for an individual to utter the sentence, but why doesn't she just leave, as Fatima's pointed out? Now, Caroline, as a GBV survivor yourself, can you relate to what Fatima's explained? Why did you stay?
Definitely, Qaadirah. While the abuse was happening, I was working at Saartjie Baartman Center. And if I look back now and I think how fearful I was, and remember as an activist, I was doing this training workshops to other women, to other audiences, and yet for me, it became almost my reality. So I stayed firstly because I wanted to keep my children together. I wanted to keep the family together. I was also because of economical reasons. How am I going to survive on my own? How am I going to see to my children on my own once again? Because remember, this is now my second marriage, and I'm going to look like a failure if my second marriage fails. Mm-hmm. So then it's me, it's not the other person. Mm-hmm. I tried, one of the things that also I always tell women, you hope for change. And you always look at the person and you think, because he's so sorry afterwards. You'd beat me, and then while I'm crying, you'd come and bring a cloth and wipe my face and kiss me and say, I'm so sorry. Mm-hmm. Immediately, So you'd be rude, swear at me, throw me with things. And then, I ended up with a hole in my head. And then immediately apologized. I remember that night when he hit me a hole in my head, how he drove me to Gatesville Medical Center. And he was all around me. I couldn't even get to tell the doctor that this man beat me like this. And he said, no, she had an accident. And I know that the medical staff realized that it was more to it. And eventually I got to say to the doctor, it's him, So they control you so much that you become fearful. And I'll never forget my late sister said to me, why are you so afraid of him? You're empowered, you're intelligent, you know everything. Why are you so afraid of him? She said to me, he's a coward. And now I look back and I see what a coward he was. But at the time, the fear was real. The fear's in my head. And I feared him. I feared if I was 5 minutes late from work, then all hell is going to break loose. All of us are going to walk on eggshells all night. And working in the sector, what I often heard from women was that they would do something just so that you can get it over and done with, because that tension stage is actually at times so much worse than the actual violence, because after the violence stage you're going to have a honeymoon, and then everything's going to be good and that. So some women would even force the hand of the perpetrator and make something happen. He slapped or he slaps, and then everything, then there's peace, because that tension stage, and it was even in our home, where the tension was so palpable, that you wish something could happen now, that it can be over. So I stayed, for various reasons women stayed. I stayed economical reason, for my children's sake, to keep the family together. I feared him. I feared, what is he going to do if he leave me? Because he used to say he will kill me if I leave him. And I had 5 years of harassment from him after he left me. Fatima was my colleague at the time at Saartjie Baartman, and she knows there was a case of attempted murder on my life.
So, Caroline, you worked at Saartjie Baartman, so you were working with you essentially on the front line when it comes to dealing with victims of abuse. And I'd like for Fatima to also jump in here as a clinical psychologist and as somebody who has almost over a decade's worth of experience. So, Caroline, would you say that women who are on the front line, who are fighting for the cause, would you say that they find it harder to admit that they themselves are in abusive relationships?
Yes and no. I think because of the shame that goes with it. I know legislation. I've been in this field for almost 30 years. So I've been part of the Sexual Offences Bill. I've been part of the Domestic Violence Act, the task team. I can tell you about the acts, the Trafficking in Persons Act. I know legislation. So I know my rights. I'm informed, I'm empowered. And so the shame that this was actually taking place. And once you open up, you give other women permission to do so. So once I started to tell my story, I realized how many women in management positions, in senior positions, in organizations, in company, police women, that is high-ranking police officers, members of parliaments, women across board. And then once you start telling your stories in different spaces, I had women that contacted me because it was happening to them. So it is a lot about shame. But I just want to tell the story about 𝙁𝙁𝙩𝙚𝙁𝙁. The fear is real for women, and women fear to leave the man, like Fatima said earlier, because she might be killed. And in this instance, she was killed. In 2018, she left her husband. He then goes, as she's coming from work at the taxi rank, him and two of his friends hijack her, they kidnap her, they take her to the house, he rapes her, and he beats her up so badly. And she escapes, and she goes to the police station. The police then takes on the case, and a charge is laid against him. He gets locked up, and so a few days later she goes back to the prosecutor now before he appears, and she says to the prosecutor, I wish to withdraw the case because I know this man is evil. If he's going to come out on bail, he's going to kill me. So what should have happened in that case was that the prosecutor should have an interview with her before withdrawing the charge. The prosecutor, it was a junior prosecutor, signed off on the case, and the case was dismissed, withdrawn. This is 2018, and she goes back to this man, and even her family is afraid of this man. So she stays with this man because if she's going to leave him, he's going to kill her. So this is 2018. 2020, January 2020, she finds the courage to leave again, late January. And she leaves him and she runs away, and she stays with a friend for a week. And he then finds her. He finds her, he fetches her from the friend's house, and she goes with him. He persuades her, come with me, I want to talk to you and that. And he take her back to his house. And him and friends are socializing there. And she sits there and she says to him, I'm leaving now. And he then beats her. And the friends try to stop him, and he wouldn't stop. And then eventually she leaves. In fact, she can't leave. The friends leave. The friends leave, and he attacks her. The friends go somewhere else and come back, and she's laying on the floor, him kicking her, And after that, she sits back on the couch, but she dies from 7 broken ribs, broken in different parts of her body. And she dies from asphyxiation because of the broken ribs. She couldn't breathe and that. And she dies. So that woman in 2018 was failed by the system. But the fear was real. Do you understand when I say they fear when they leave that the perpetrator will kill them. She stays on with the perpetrator. 2 years later, she plucks up enough courage or strength to leave, and he then subsequently kills her. What was good in the case? So it was bad because initially they failed her. But the good thing that came from that, the magistrate then sentenced him for the 2018 charge as well as 2020. He got 2 life sentences. So when we speak about why women stay, and often as society, even as women, as Fatima say, then we say, Nise lektai, Nise valsikamadai. No, so why don't you go? Why doesn't she just leave? I stayed in an abusive relationship because I was afraid. I couldn't even tell my colleagues until I ended up with a hole in my head, with a charge laid, and that is how things came out, So the fear is there. We've been on a case. I don't know if you remember the case where in Q-Town where we all rushed when they called Saartjie Baartman, when a man just shot his wife here in Q-Town, So women stay because of various reasons. And a lot of the times it's cultural, it's a religion. As a Christian woman, I know that pastors will preach to you. Other women will say, I prayed for my husband, and people encourage you to pray, and so you also feel like, oh, maybe I'm not faithful enough, maybe my faith is not strong enough, So
Just also going back to looking at, we find, and this is research that shows as well, that women who live in abusive relationships are actually 70 times more at risk for the perpetrator to actually kill them. And this doesn't mean that I'm not saying this in the sense of our listeners being scared to actually leave, but therefore it's very important to strategize, a safety plan and how we end up working out something, because you are at risk. And this is one example to many of the cases that we've had where the women have been failed by the system and others. The fear is very real and valid. The woman lives with this man. She knows. It's not over-exaggerating and really feeling that, no, he's going to kill me. It's a real fear. It has happened. He has shown, there's evidence for the physical abuse and what he is capable of.
I just want to, one of the other cases that stands out for me now is the 𝙗𝙖𝙩𝙚𝙚𝙧𝙨 case. She goes and she's so, you must remember, like Fatima says, when a woman comes and speak to you, when she comes and complain to you, it's between the 7th and the 12th time when she comes. She must pluck up so much courage to go and get a protection order. So we see in June month, Renisha 𝙗𝙗𝙩𝙚𝙚 goes to the court on the Friday and she goes for protection order. And remember, one of the other big things in Cape Town is gangsterism. So the intersectionality between gangsterism and violence against women is huge. And so this man is a gangster and he's a renowned gangster. And so he's a gang leader, in fact. And he is the son of a gang leader. He's part of the gang. But so how
in the structure.
In the structure. And so she doesn't do anything. But that day she had enough courage to go to the magistrate's court for protection order in town. They tell her that they're working on skeleton staff. She got there before lunchtime. She gets there and they say to her, I'm sorry, we can't help you today. By the Tuesday, he killed her and a daughter of 7 years old. So she was 27 and the daughter 7 years old. So again, we see a case of when a woman eventually comes out, like we know they're most vulnerable. Oh, so you think you're going to see what I do to you. And you know that. So they make themselves more vulnerable. And yes, like Fatima would say, I want to reiterate, we're not saying women should stay, but we know that women are more vulnerable when they leave the relationship. And the Tuesday, he kills her and a daughter.
I mean, it's very evident. And, Caroline and Fatima, you point out a few cases that, some people might be familiar with. And then there are others that make headlines, such as the woman in KZN who was shot and killed outside of her family home while her entire family was having, a gathering. So there are stories like this which make headlines, and there are a lot of stories which don't make headlines, as we pointed out in the first episode. Now, Fatima, I just want to hear from your side, why is it that women on the front line find it so much harder to admit that they, that they are suffering from abuse?
Well, firstly, let's look at it. They are frontline workers, so people look up to them, right? And many a time, looking up, that takes a lot of courage and strength to be the role model and the example. And so to actually inform somebody else that I'm going through this as well can lead to many things. I mean, one, it can give a perceived message to others that, well, if you being in this profession and the sector is going through this itself, then what hope is there for me? Okay, so that's one of the things that women find it difficult to actually then admit to being in an abusive relationship. But then at the same time, there's so much intricacies that's going on within the relationship that every day you have others that are depending on you, that you have to be strong. You have to somehow have this blind spot of actually just denying what's going on with me right now because other people are going through a much more difficult time than me. So I need to be there for them. All right, I need to put on that makeup and I need to actually show up and I need to be there because women depend on me. All right, so that's also there's a lot that's at stake, and then a lot of it has got to do with fear, judgment, all right, shame, guilt, doubt, confusion. These are all emotions that many women will go through before finally also leaving.
You are tuned in to Enough, the GBV Conversation on Radio 786 100.4 FM. It's time now for us to take a short break, and when we return, we will continue. A reminder once again that your comments and questions are welcome. Send them through via WhatsApp on 0786 10 11 12, and stay tuned to Radio 786 on 100.4 FM.
Enough, the GBV Conversation.
Welcome back to Enough, the GBV Conversation, here on Radio 786 100.4 FM. In studio with me is clinical psychologist Fatima Ismail, as well as the director of the Callas Foundation, 𝘾𝙧𝙚𝙀𝙀. This evening we reflect on the cycles of abuse and why women stay. Now, just before the break, we spoke about, why women on the front line find it so difficult to admit that they are in abusive relationships. And Caroline, you were one of those women, as you explained to us. But I do want to ask, what was the breaking point for you? What was it that made you decide now is the time for me to leave?
Qaadirah, often, like I said previously, we hope for change and that. And so the violence escalated. So I'll never forget the first time he swore at me. I wanted to die because he swore at me. The next time he threw a plate at me. And so the violence escalated. The next time he just beat me with his elbow, And then it became a lot more physical in many ways. And so until I ended up with a big gash in my head. But the breaking point was also for me, and even then, it was, I could still forgive him. Because you also feel like you still love this man, and our love will conquer all, and that. But then the breaking point was for me when he held my daughter. She was in matric at the time, and he choked her. And so remember, it was not his daughter. It was my daughter from my previous marriage, and he held my daughter when she tried to intervene. So she tried to stop him from hitting me, and he got hold of her and he choked her. And that was my breaking point. It was almost as a mother that you said, you can touch me, you can hurt me, but you're not going to hurt my children. And so that was when I decided that I'm leaving.
And that's your maternal instinct kicking in there.
Yes, definitely. It's almost like I would take the beatings, but he dare not touch my children.
Now, Fatima, we've spoken about rape, we've spoken about, physical violence, but this, of course, this is not the only way that violence appears or how abusive relationships appear. I mean, some abusive relationships don't leave marks on their victims.
Absolutely. And sometimes that tends to be the worst because there's no signs. And many times, if you report it, people want to know where's the evidence. And emotional abuse, psychological abuse does not necessarily show scars, visible physical scars, but the emotional abuse can have complications for a lot more longer. Okay, so I mean, in Caroline's case, she describes completely extreme, violent physical abuse that has really progressed, as she mentions, from verbal abuse to physical abuse. And in many cases, we don't necessarily have this. All right, we can have verbal and financial abuse at its core. When we speak about the cycle of violence and the violent acute stage, it may not necessarily be physical. It can be financial abuse in the sense of either, for example, spending all the money, gambling out the money, withholding, not buying groceries, or taking your money. All right, it can also be emotional abuse to the extent of actually calling you names, ridiculing your behavior, all right, humiliating you in front of others. it can be to the point of actually undressing you in front of your children, for example. All right. So there's many forms, and not necessarily physical, and I think that this should be emphasized, because many a times, and also for our listeners, that physical abuse is not the only form of abuse. Physical and sexual abuse are the most extreme forms, but it's not the only forms of abuse. So you need to recognize the abusive, and it's quite individualized. The abuse in your state, I mean, you may not necessarily be able to take the extreme swearing and physical abuse or demands from somebody, whereas another person may not be able to actually deal with the financial debt that they are in. So we need to recognize that it's very different.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned there, humiliating somebody in front of their family members and those sort of things. And I want to speak to that point. I want to speak to the importance of community and family support. Oftentimes when something like that happens, you find that whoever's around, we try to intervene. In the case that, as Caroline pointed out, with 𝙁𝙭𝙩𝙚𝙬𝙚, the friends tried to stop her ex-husband from abusing her. If it happens that it's verbal abuse or emotional abuse taking place, a family member is going to intervene or call someone out. Now, community members and families, they report intervening in these sort of situations, only to find that the victim then defends the abuser, and this can be confusing. How does the general public navigate a situation like this?
Can I just Qaadirah, so for me, when she and you must remember, like in the case with Dipo, like we said earlier, she was afraid of the man, and the mother went to her. And the mother said to her, "Poor, you need to get out. This man is going to kill you." And she smiled and she says, "No, Mama, don't worry. I'm okay." But then it was also to protect the mother, because he was such a violent person, that she knew he would even attack him. I mean, we have seen perpetrators not just kill the victim, but the rest of the family or family members. So when a woman, but I want to say, community support is so important. We often, and again, I cannot say this enough, that domestic violence is not a personal issue. It is a whole of society approach is going to dismantle GBV. Or violence against women. It is going to take a whole of society. So I want to say the community and community support is so vital. Often one of the other things I say is that see something, say something. See something, say something. And because even family members, sometimes we say we don't want to get involved, we don't know what she's doing. Because remember, the perpetrators are sometimes the most charming person. So he comes to the family gathering and everybody loves him. So she says, if I'm going to say anything wrong or bad about him, they're going to think I'm mad. But meantime, at home, the scenario is completely different. He's as a Jekyll and Hyde. So for the family, it is almost when she comes, then she knows, she stays. And then eventually when family intervene, we also know that she keeps quiet because she wants to keep a family together. And then we go back to the same reasons of why women stay.
So just to say on that, Caroline, you've mentioned, just the intervening and community support. Not in all cases do people actually intervene.
Yes.
I mean, think about it. Your neighbor, you can hear the noise next door of a quarrel, and our response is, it's not our business, let's not intervene. Okay? And also, people generally do not want to be the one to firstly cause any problems within an intimate relationship, and neither wants to be the one to actually phone the police. And oftentimes they would do it as anonymous, right? But actually, as Caroline says, this is everyone's concern. This is not a private matter. And I want to also emphasize that, especially even within the Muslim communities, we tend to be a lot more silenced because we think that this is generally how relationships should be, and we need to keep quiet about it. And if you do say something, you are seen as you're modern, okay? And you're also told, especially by older generations, that you need to sabr, you need to persevere. And actually, Allah doesn't ask for you to be abused,
Yes.
right? So this notion of being the savior, and we need to get through this, and we need to struggle with this, but this is our life, and it will get better. You know, we need to really, we don't need to suffer,
Yeah,
all right? There is nothing like that. So community support is important in actually breaking away. As I mentioned before, that a woman would leave the relationship at least 7 to 12 times. In this time, it's sure, I can only imagine just the frustrations that I've heard over the years of family members saying, but each time we do something about it and we intervene, and she goes back. So she makes a fool out of us. All right, Caroline, I'm sure you can relate to this. She makes a fool out of us, and we're not going to anymore. The last time I gave her a place and she went back to the home. So we need to understand that it's complicated. It's not easy. Many a time she would leave, each time knowingly understanding, what do I need to do next? What do I need to learn? You know, each time she might be plucking up, okay, so if I leave this time over here, what more do I need? Okay, no. I need to go back because I need to fix this and that. I need to sort out that. I need to get the papers of so-and-so. So it's also quite often tactful and not necessarily just she's doing her own thing and she doesn't know what she's doing, and she wants this, she goes back each time. So it's important that family members do not turn a blind eye, and each time, even she comes back to you the 20th time, take her back, support her, allow her to make that decision, to finally at some point to make the decision that whether it is to stay in the relationship and get help and empower herself, or whether it is to leave. Respect her decision, but allow her the support, you know, to be there for her.
And speaking of support, if somebody was contemplating leaving an abusive relationship, what does a safety plan to leave an abusive relationship entail?
Okay, so a safety plan. So if we discuss safety plans with women, remember, like we said earlier, women are most vulnerable when they decide to leave.
Yes.
So a safety plan would look like, do you have your papers? One of the worst thing is that perpetrators does. I mean, one woman said to me 2 days ago, she said, I don't have a matric certificate. I need to apply for something, but he tore up my matric certificate. So paperwork is always important. Make sure. And like Fatima said, we don't know if she's going back to get the papers from home and that. But a safety plan would look like, make sure. We even say to women, so if you know you're going to leave from work, every day when you go to work, you put on another item of clothing. You make sure your papers, you make sure someone knows. You have code languages, because remember, there's power and control when it comes to gender-based violence. The perpetrator has control of your phone and everything else. So make sure someone knows, speak in coded languages. You know, so when you leave, know where you are going to. Because remember, if you don't know where you're going to, you might just change your mind and go back. If you're going to a shelter, make sure all the details are sorted. If you're going to a family member, make sure they know where to get you, what is happening. But you need to make sure. And if that fails, so what happens if that fails? Do you have someone that know where you are, what's going to happen? So that's just the general. Fatima can add on.
So Caroline covered, I mean, you really touched on everything. Just to add to that, what I normally tell people is really, I mean, so in sessions specifically, I would work out the safety plan with them, a written one, you know, and keep it with me as well, and give them a copy, leave it at someone where it's safe, you know, and it would look like, who are the persons, for example, the support system, if you were to leave your home or you were to be kicked out, where would you go to? All right, so who are the persons, their names, their details, all right? Also asking them to actually pack an overnight bag, all right, and leave it at a friend's place or a family member. And this would be with all the paperwork that Caroline mentioned. It would have also your children's copies of the birth certificates, their IDs, their clinic cards, your driver's license or keys, whatever medication you may need, anything that you may need to leave in a hurry that you can keep with you, because you're not going to think at that time, I need this, I need that, and that might then have you go back, you know, and it might be the last time that you go back. So we want you to actually be prepared, have that overnight bag. The coding, you can, for example, speak to your neighbor and say, listen, if I actually press this light on and off 5 times, please know that I'm actually
Yes.
needing help and you need to call the police.
Yes.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
It's these little
Yes.
nuanced things that you
Yes.
can do to help, even as you can hear, that family and others can do to support you in this way. So we look at also what are helpline numbers, what are shelters,
Yes.
availability, you know, getting things in place for yourself so that when you leave, you know, many times also children are used as
Pawns.
you know, against you. And children might also give out your plan and say,
Yes.
oh, daddy,
Yes.
mommy said that so and so. You know, sorry, you cutting me off already with my
I'm sorry.
time.
I just want to be able to, you know, because I've gotten a couple of messages, very quickly running out of time, but there are some wonderful messages that have come through from some of our listeners that I feel should definitely be shared. This one says, Assalamu alaikum, someone in the family was in an abusive marriage. It took her 10 years to leave. The family couldn't understand. Alhamdulillah, now she looks back and cannot believe that it took her that long to leave. She is now healthy and has a good job and loves life. Alhamdulillah. So there are a couple of messages, and unfortunately we don't have all the time to, you know, read through them, but that is the gist of it. And I think if you are in this situation and you are contemplating, you know, leaving, you've got the safety plan, as pointed out by Caroline and Fatima, and so you know, there are multiple resources for you to reach out on to. Fatima, Caroline, thank you so much for your valuable input. I mean, we will have to leave it at this point now, but listeners, please join us again in our next episode where we unpack the legal support available to survivors. And please continue to wear your white ribbon in support of the 16 days of activism against GBV. And this support is needed 365 days of the year. We're just ending off with our message of hope today. Please know that you deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve to be safe. You deserve a happy life. And your children deserve a safe and happy life. Break the silence and restore your dignity. Enough is enough. The GBV Conversation, proudly brought to you by the Islamic Medical Association and Saartjie Baartman Center, and presented and supported by Radio 786. Do stay tuned to Radio 786 on 100.4 FM.